As Dan said, my name is Laura Stewart. Sorry, I was told to be in front of the camera. I'll move. Welcome. If you didn't get one of the surveys, which looks like this, which are on the chairs, I'll put some ones in the back of the room, so please fill that out. It really is more about getting to understand what you want out of this group, okay? And a little bit about yourself so that we can tailor the discussions each time we have a meeting towards you all. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panel. Over here we have Case. Case has been with the startup for about 3 years in the beginning, and but then has moved on from there. And I'd like to give him an opportunity just to say a couple of words about himself and his experience.
Hello, thank you for having me. I worked at startup for 3 years as the only technical writer, and I had no idea what I was doing. So I'm kind of just here to honestly share my experiences of what worked and what didn't. And I went on from the startup and I work at Google now. I work on web stuff.
Okay.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks, Case. And next I'd like to introduce you to Elisa. Elisa has worked for several startup companies and is now been with a number of larger companies. I'll let you, Elisa, talk about that.
Hi. I got to work at a startup pretty early in my career as a technical writer, and since then I've done contract work in both mostly startup type environments within larger companies. Sometimes where I've been the only writer with a team of developers, and so it wasn't much different. And it's a lot of fun. Challenging sometimes too.
Thank you very much. And thank you. And next I'd like to introduce you to Daria. Daria describes herself as a startup addict, which I love. I love that. And she's been working with a lot of different startups, so I'd like her to talk about that, maybe a little bit about moving from IPO and acquisitions when we get into those questions.
Okay. Yes, I've worked for a lot of companies you've never heard of. I've almost worked exclusively for startups. All of my big company experience that I have has been through acquisitions. So I can talk a little bit about, the role of the startup tech writer as you move into a big company as well. I have some experience with that. I've been with failed startups. I've been with successful startups, and it is a lot of fun and a lot of hard work. But I love it.
Great, thank you. And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Richard. Hi, Richard. Richard is currently a freelance writer, but he has got a tremendous amount of experience. He has been a developer, he has been a marketeer, he's been a leader in a lot of different ways. So Richard, why don't you tell us a little more?
All right. I guess my first startup experience grew out of my being a graduate student in math in the 60s at Berkeley. And my thesis advisor had a small company, and I mean really small. And I was the technical director of it for about a year, and then we had a falling out, and I had to go, and I lost my everything. He dumped me, he stopped paying me, all of those things. And so I had to go out and get a real job, and I went out and got a programming job in Berkeley with another startup, a small thing that had been started by a fellow you may have heard of by the name of Bill Wattenberg, who was famous in the area. He was he made his name by attacking BART and finding all the things that were wrong with BART, and then he became a talk radio guy. But anyway, he and Don Glaser, who was a Nobel Prize winner at Berkeley, had started a small clinical laboratory computing business, and I worked there for 4 years. And then I went on to another startup, and then I went on to another startup, and by the time we got, I'd been 10 years into my career, I've been working for nothing but startups, and I did a lot of stuff since then, but only in the last year or so I've done some writing work for startups, and so I'll be happy to tell you all about anything you want to ask about.
So a couple of little housekeeping things. If you've got questions, and when you have questions, if you could come over here, we're going to try to record this. This is, by the way, being recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, please say goodbye now. Because some people who were not able to be or asked could you record the session. So we're recording it. There are a couple of cameras. One is facing the panelists, and one is here facing whoever is going to be asking the question. There's a little marker on the ground. And if you wouldn't mind coming up to that, that would be great. That way, the people in the recording can hear the question that you're asking. Okay. So let's get started. Does someone have a question they'd like to start off with? Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So one of the things that I'm always
over here. We're going to leave this.
Your organizer blows it right away. So one of the things that I'm always curious to hear is what your tool set is at startups, because you can't afford like big fancy. A lot of times you can't afford big fancy software. So what did you primarily use when you were at a startup?
Sure, I'll start.
When I first came on, they were like writing their docs in Google Drive, and it was just pretty much one step up from PDF. I'm like, this is insanity. So I looked around, and I was like really into the technical writing community. So I was like, oh, DocBook is what people use. Ooh. And I just like hacked together this system with. I authored it all in DocBook, and then I wrote like a custom XSL to translate it into Twitter Bootstrap, so I get like a really nice website. And it was just the most insane thing that I could have ever thought of, and it was like, and so part of the experience was I had a lot of free reign at my company to do whatever I wanted, which was one of my favorite things about working at a startup. But then I went back to the drawing board. I'm like, okay, this is way too like custom, and nobody knows how to use it. So after that, I looked around. I think actually I went to write the docs, and I like got more understanding that there's a lot of really good tools out there with like a really strong community backing. And I settled on Sphinx, and then I like deployed it with Heroku. So it was really quite simple after I did it. Maybe I'll like write a little guide on how that workflow, how to set up that tool chain. But the big thing was for me was that it was free and good source control and good documentation and like a strong community backing from the tool sets, so that I had some confidence that it would stick around after I was gone.
So I've been at this a long time, so I've chosen everything from FrameMaker to Sphinx to Dita. The last two companies that I have come in to start their documentation, I have chosen Dita, and we use Oxygen as the XML editor, and then we have a number of transforms to generate web-based documentation as well as PDFs.
So I used to write grant proposals before I started writing technical documentation. And I started learning FrameMaker actually when I was writing grant proposals, because I got so tired of Word repaginating everything when you had to have everything perfect. So that was actually good for me, because the first startup where I worked already had Frame. And from there I got interested in Dita Open Toolkit, and I've worked with that some, and I really fell in love with Sphinx Doc just because it's really easy to use, which is partly why I started coming to write the docs. And there's one company where I'm working now that probably is going to change over from FrameMaker. They're sort of a late stage startup. They'll change from FrameMaker. I was going to recommend Sphinx Doc, but they'll probably, it might be better for them to have Madcap Player just because of the support that their staff writer has, and I'm a contractor, so I'm the one who's in love with Sphinx Doc, but I can see a lot of value to Madcap Player because this year they started supporting HTML5, so you know it's pretty good.
Well, last year I spent a a stint as a contractor for a small company called Apsara over on, where is it, on Howard Street. And we used something called the middleman, which is which generates static websites, and we all our source was in Markdown, which we kept in a Git repository, and that was a very smooth workflow and very convenient and completely inexpensive, and it's as good a choice as any.
Another question? Yes.
I'm keen to hear Andrew put up a whole bunch of questions.
Oh, okay. I've got some of his questions.
Come on,
They were
Andrew,
excellent questions.
give us one of your questions.
Tell me what I asked.
Are you asking? So one of the questions that Andrew asked was, what skills does a startup tech writer need to succeed? And we'll go from there. So I'll ask each one of you a different question. So Richard, do you want to go with that one?
Well, I'm not sure it's a different skill set from any other walk of life. I mean, you have to be flexible. You have to be able to prioritize. You have to be able to do a lot of jobs and be willing to get outside your comfort zone and do things that you might not have thought you wanted to do, and that's how you succeed at a startup.
So, Elise, what about how do you meet the needs of such varied audiences that you're trying to write for?
Well, I had been writing for varied audiences before I came into high tech, and so I got used to it. And I have a whole sort of soapbox that I've developed about using storycraft in technical writing. So I got interested in the idea that really good technical documentation, even when you're addressing the needs of a very, very technical audience, what I found that I could organize things using a story arc, and it would make more sense to people. And so with a story, you have a beginning, a middle, and end. And we've internalized story arc because most of us really like to watch movies. And the movie industry rediscovered things that other storytellers have known. And I believe that our brains are hardwired to understand things in some form of story arc. So if you pay attention to some movies that have really wide audiences, especially if you like science fiction, and many of us do, then pay attention to the fact that there'll be different specific facts that get different kinds of people nodding their heads, right? And then if you're talking to people, even in your own company, who are working in different areas of the company, you pay attention to what what gets the accountant nodding their head, and what does the senior developer, what gets the senior developers nodding their heads. There'll be slightly different things. But if we're used to watching movies that can address the needs of large audiences, and so you want to have things, you want to be including those key things where you've already seen a good response. And that's actually how screenwriters work. They test their material. So we need to be using those same kinds of skills. So I could go on. I could. Yeah, but I think that gets the main point across.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, could you give an example of a story arc in technical documentation for a software product? Just to kind of make it concrete for me.
Well, okay, one thing that I used in a presentation once was just, how do you teach, teaching somebody to use terminal on a Mac, right? So you might just ask the question, where am I? PWD, print working directory, and then show them, this is the beginning, where am I? Where do I want to go? So there's a little bit of a journey, so CD, and And then, you know, you want to give them one other little thing pertinent to what they're trying to do. You know, it's like opening a document using terminal or something like that. And then, you know, just so give them a little bit of an increase in the difficulty of understanding. And I mean, terminal's not very difficult, but it's something that some people find intimidating, right? And then, you know, they perform something they didn't think they could do. That's the journey into the unknown, based on you know, what it's like, I can't do this. No, you know, and that's the hero's journey. I can't do it. I'm not going to be able to do it. Yes, you can, you know. Here's the one other little easy step, building on something that you know. All right, you know, and then they do it a couple more times, you know, then, you know, if you have a longer story, then you have to have some sort of recap that helps people understand you've gotten there, you've achieved something. All right, so, you know, that's basically how you could design a really good tutorial. So the basic idea is, you know, something simple to start with, you know, give them some sample code, give them some code snippets, increase the complexity, give them a sense of proficiency, you know, and you can make it long or short. The stories can be serials. You know, how many of us binge watch Netflix? So you can have a series of stories, a series of tutorials that really gets people into something so that they're familiar with a new technology by the time they've gone through that whole thing. So we have all the analogies in front of us. Okay.
I'll ask a couple more questions, okay, and then back to you guys. Darren, you work for a lot of startups. How do you avoid burnout at a startup?
I don't know. I think I personally, like, I thrive on that energy of a startup, and I like chaos, and I like making order of chaos, so that's something that feeds me. But that said, I think to avoid burnout, you have to set boundaries. You know, I'm a mother and I have a family, so, you know, I cannot work till midnight. I leave at 5 or 6 o'clock every night. And I think at this point in my career, most of the people that I've worked with at other startups as well. We kind of follow each other around, so they kind of know what they're getting with me, and my boundaries. And so I think that's important, is just kind of setting expectations, because startups will let you work as much as you want to work. They will not tell you to go home, you know, and stop working. So that's something that you kind of have to take control of.
Okay, so my question to you is, within a startup, often you're the only writer. And where, ideally, would that writer sit organizationally? Do you sit with engineering? Do you sit with marketing? What has worked and not worked with where you've been?
My experience was mostly within the engineering department, and that was fine. But like, honestly, for me, like I think one of the successful qualities of being successful qualities of a good startup writer would be like really connected and engaged with all of the different departments. Like somebody that I just talked to in like preparing for this panel, she was like, if somebody's not talking to me, I want to know why they're not talking to me. Like, what's going on in that department? And because it's all about just gathering all the information. So wrap it up. Good technical writer, it's kind of arbitrary where you sit because you're going to be talking with everybody.
I'll ask a question.
Okay.
So if you're at a startup and you're at the point where the company needs to make money because investors have put a lot in, but it's not really showing that black line, you know, it's going downhill. At what point do your nerves just give way and you decide to jump ship, or do you just ride it out until they decide to lock the door?
I got some stories. There was one startup I worked at where I went on vacation and I came back and they had failed while I was on vacation, and I like walked into the office when I got back and my stuff was like in a little box and like everything was cleared out. So sometimes you know it's coming and sometimes you don't. I think if you, most of the companies I work for, I joined because I believe in the product and what they're trying to do. So there's only 2 places that I've worked that have failed, and I did stay till the end, till they kicked me out. One company that failed, they were acquired, which is just a way of VCs like shuffling things on the books, saying, here, you own this company now. But so that company was in Arizona, and I did end up doing a 3-month contract with them, helping them get their doc team going in Arizona, and then moved on. So I tend to wait it out.
All right, so I'm going to be the dreaded comment and then a 2-parter question. Because I work as with Laura and Matt, and we acquired a company over the summer, and I sort of inherited their non-existent doc set. So I'm sort of wondering, has it been harder for you to get buy-in for writing documentation at all at these startups? And along with that, were you hired as a technical writer for these startups? Did they know, oh, we need documentation, we need a writer? Or did you sort of fall into that role from something similar?
Sure. I started like a very narrowly defined task, like update screenshots and documents. And then I was just like really hungry, and I was like, yeah, I want to do QA, and I want to do like illustrations for you guys. So I like went all over, which is actually, just a quick aside, it was a really cool way to gain a lot of knowledge about the company. Like I probably had more wide horizontal knowledge than anybody else in that company. And what was your question again?
Was it hard for you to get buy-in when you wanted to write new docs? Like, were people resistant to you asking them a million questions to find out how the product worked? Or were they sort of like, oh my god, yes, we need you to documentation, please, I will tell you everything?
Yeah, where I worked was an Internet of Things company, so there was a cloud team and there was an engineering team. And cloud team, it was so abstract that I kind of by necessity had to interact more, and yeah, it was hard to get by on. They were like extremely strapped for time. I think in retrospect, it's kind of just a matter of me like enrolling them into the importance of this documentation. And then for the engineering side, I just like dug into the code. It was really fun, and I think that's a huge quality, just like to be curious about everything, to enjoy the learning. So I kind of bypassed the whole buy-in thing just by figuring it out on my own. And then getting reviews a lot easier than getting somebody to like help me create a document.
So in my experience, I have been brought in to start the documentation and sometimes training at these companies. So I think the startups that have hired me have thought about it early, which is good. The company I'm at now actually thought about it kind of late. They waited until they had launched and they have customers. And the customers are like, where's the documentation? And then they thought about it. So that was that's been a little more challenging because I came in with a lot of pressure and a lot of catch up to do. But I think this is probably the exception to the other places I've worked at where they have thought about it when they were still in stealth or still without customers.
So I kind of wanted to give my own answer of the other question about getting information. There are times I've had to be really inventive, but over time, when I see the backside of people running away from me as I was walking towards their cubicle, I realized that most people really like to talk shop, so I started going out once a week with a group of developers and just getting them talking about their work so that they got more accustomed to the idea that they're just sharing information about something they're passionate about with me. And so, you know, that's been a really important thing. You know, still there are times when it's really hard to get information, but also I really like digging into code, and so I'll you know, go in and do code comments, and then just sort of tag them and say, I'm not sure if I'm exactly right here, you know, could you take a look? And then they really appreciate the fact that I've been, you know, contributing something. And it helps if you really show them what it is to do excellent quality writing, because then what they're starting to see sometimes is that you're making them look good. So I've even had developers start coming to me with little snippets of sample code so that their own code will be in the documentation, and they'll be able to point at it. You know, they're getting something out of it.
Well, I kind of forgot the question, but
It was
I think-
basically if you've had any struggles getting buy-in from people as far as writing the documentation you wanted to write.
I think usually they hire me to write the documentation, so I don't have trouble on that end. My trouble is usually trying to figure out what's going on. If you're in some sort of startup, especially if you haven't been there from the beginning, but they bring you in to help them with their documentation, there are people who have been so immersed in it that they don't even know what people need to know to understand it. They may work directly with customers. They may, in fact, many startups are in the situation where you send an engineer with the product, and they just keep working with it and get it set up. So to go to the point where you have general documentation that lets the company go to the next level, because you don't have to send an engineer with each thing you sell. You really have to get in there, understand what's going on, pull it together, and then try to put it out there in a form that people can use. And I don't know how to make it any clearer than that, but it's really the main thing that I find I have to do.
Thank you guys for being here. My name is Jessie. I work at Salon with Sarah and Laura. I actually have a lot of questions, but I'll just one. For those of you at the startups where you might not have any customers yet, how are you identifying your customer and who to write it for? And I'll take my answer off here.
Well, I can tell you that most places that don't have customers aren't really interested in having documentation.
Oh.
It's basically my answer to that, and they don't really get interested in documentation until they get a few customers and they keep being pestered with questions.
So I worked at an early stage startup that had started off with, when I started, they had one customer, but we had to imagine other customers. But since there was one, I could imagine other customers that might be similar with some differences, and that's basically the idea, you know, just use your imagination. And also, you know, it's like, well, what customers do we want to have, you know, so that you're writing for those people that the company's trying to attract. So you can study up on what kind of information is already available for the type of audience you're trying to attract, see what written materials they respond to, and adopt a style that works for that audience. You know, so basically use your imagination.
yeah, I've started at a few companies that did not have customers yet. What I usually do, well, most of the companies I have worked for are in the same market space in big data, and so they're all trying to solve some aspect, a problem of big data, and so the customers are kind of all the same. So I understand that audience pretty well. But one of the things I do is I look at the competitors' documentation, if there is some out there, other similar products in the market space, see what they're doing. I focus on the problem that this particular new technology is trying to solve. Also, a lot of times when a technology is really new, you might have to come up with some creative ways of explaining it and helping users make that leap from what the old way of doing things was and the new way of doing things. So, for example, one of the products I worked on was a distributed database. So a lot of those users knew what a database was, but distributed database was a new concept at that time. So kind of helping them make that leap from the old to the new. So a lot of concepts and tutorials and pictures. I like pictures.
Yeah, hi, me again. Daria,
Yes.
you mentioned that you had chosen DITA
Yes.
at the current last few companies.
Yes.
Why did you choose it, and how did you make the case?
So I looked into the different requirements that the company had. So the first company I had chosen it for, they were developing a data processing software. They were going after government and financial clients, so there was a big requirement to have offline documentation, or documentation that those clients could install in their data centers. They didn't have access to the internet, so using something like Confluence or another cloud solution was kind of out of the picture. It just seemed to meet a lot of the things that I wanted to do, even though I didn't know how to do them with DITA at the time. Just kind of reading up, and then once I kind of went down the road of picking it was kind of like a hard and fast lesson of figuring it out quick. I actually hired a contractor. That's another rule of the startup, is know what you're not good at and get help. I'm really good at writing content. I'm not so good at the tool stuff, so I brought in a contractor to make my PDF transforms and do all that CSS stuff and make it pretty, and it was great. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, love to hear more.
So how many of you are tools people?
Kind of a tools guy.
Yeah. I mean, that maker tools and stuff like that. And do you think it's important, or it's important in some way, but as the writer role, because they're two different things. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just fun to like think through the different authoring workflows and path of least resistance. I don't really have much to say about it.
I think picking tools is a big part of if you come in as that first tech writer, because you need to pick something that's going to meet your needs right now and the needs in the future. So I've been through a few acquisitions, and part of that acquisition process is that other company looking at how you do things and seeing how easy that's going to be and what kind of information that's part of the due diligence process of getting acquired. So you kind of want to think about, yeah, you need to get started fast, but you also kind of want to use best practices and take a look at what big companies are doing as well. A lot of big companies are using DITA in XML.
So I prefer writing to working with tools, but I can't tell you how many times I've come in as a contractor and the tools are broken. And and because I like to tinker, I mean, I was a girl who took apart my mom's sewing machine and put it back together, and there were a couple of parts that I couldn't find out where they fit, but the sewing machine worked fine. So you know, I do really enjoy tinkering, and so you know, it does take me away from writing a little too much, but there it is.
Well, back when I was a developer, I was a tools person. I liked, I wrote debuggers and operating systems and stuff like that. But I haven't really done a lot of tools work as a writer ever since the FrameMaker days, when I used to do a lot of template work and get those things right, and that was kind of fun. But no, I think we have specialists who do the tools now. If you're going to do data, as Daria says, you need somebody to come in and really set it up for you, rather than trying to figure out how to use the open toolkit and how to do the transforms and how to get the kinds of output you want and all of that stuff. It's just if you focus on that, you'll never get your work done.
I have a follow-up question on this. When you've gone to startups, have they initially dictated to you what they wanted, what tools they wanted to use, or did they let you have leeway in choosing the offering tool?
It's been both. Different startups have different ideas. Sometimes there are people who have a clear idea of what tools that they want to see used, and other times they want information from me to help them make a decision. And I like to include as many people as possible in decision making if I can do it that way.
And any of them said, you must use this, or I want you to use open source only? Have you had any of that happen?
Well, no, usually it's more like, what's the cost and what do we get from paying that money?
Right.
And then, what are we going to have to pay consultants if we adopt open source? How are we going to maintain it, blah, blah, blah. So there's a series of questions, and it's basically cost-benefit analysis. And different things make sense for different companies. Certain things, you want to make sure that people are going to be around. If you're going to use open source, people, that it's when there's open source and nobody's around to maintain it, is when somebody like me is brought in and surprise, surprise, the tool's broken. Well, yeah, I do know how to fix it, but you know what? It's taking me away from the writing that needs to be done too. And so, sometimes people don't plan really well to support open source. They think it's low cost or no cost, when they really need to write something into a plan. And sometimes people don't want to hear that. So in that case, if I really see that people don't want to hear anything about the real cost of open source for writers, I'm going to do something like recommend, that they buy a completely baked product, because I want to have compassion on the writer who's going to be trying to pick up the pieces later on. So, yeah.
All the places I've been, I have been able to make the decision myself, but I definitely have had to take into consideration what other people thought and wanted. The one company that I chose, SphinxDoc, was one of the requirements was they had an open source component, and they wanted developers to be able to contribute to that, developers outside of the company in the community. So they needed something that developers liked to write in, and SphinxDoc was a popular choice. So that's why we went with that company. So again, it goes back to the requirements and what is the audience of the product, how the product's going to be delivered, who's going to be using the product, and how they're going to consume it. That should feed into your decision about tools rather than just picking what's popular. You kind of got to think ahead of everything that's going to happen.
Yeah, I had leeway to make my decision, what tools to use. Requirements were a big one for us. Like, there was they wanted some kind of protection behind some of the documentation, and early on in the requirements, we looked at Confluence, but the whole user user-based system and like I think it was the potential for some customers to see other customers. That was like a deal breaker for us. So, and then I like markdown approaches because it's just completely taking over like all developer documentation that I see nowadays is markdown. So everybody knows it, so there's no upfront investment compared to DocBook or Dida for me. Like, no engineers, from my experience, they despise XML things. Yeah.
One question. Which do you like better, working for small companies or large companies, and why? What part of your personality meshes with the different locations?
I guess it starts with I like small companies. I like small companies because it's less about developing documentation and it's about developing a company, if that makes sense. So you're there to write the documentation or develop the training, but you're also kind of invested in this company being successful. And there's this camaraderie and team binding together that goes with that. I like being able to walk into the CEO's office and ask him what he did over the weekend. It's a family. So I like small companies. I like that my input is affecting a lot of different areas of the company besides just these books that come out.
I've worked in large companies, but usually in sort of startup type groups in the large companies, and so that's more what I relate to. It's almost a small company feel, and so I really sort of bond with the engineering team in some way if I'm in a contract long enough. And that's something, I think it's similar but a little different from what you're saying. It is kind of a sense of family. So I like to feel useful to actual people, and by working in a group that has a sort of cohesiveness, I get that sensation that I'm really doing something that's helpful to a group of people who I really like. So because it's helping them sell their product.
Well, there's good and bad in everything, and I like big companies sometimes, but I think more I like small companies. Big companies are good. They put a predictable amount of pressure on you. They pay you. They're not going to go out of business generally. Some do. The small companies, as Daria says, you can go in and talk to the CEO, and that's fun, and it's nice to get to know the developers and be on a close relation with them or understand the problems they're working on. And in a small company, you can really do every job, basically, or sometimes you have to do every job. So the pressure is bigger on a small company. The sense of knowing the people is better. It's really, it's just good and bad and everything. Wherever you wind up, you can find the good part of it. But if you really want your work to be part of your social life, you want a small company.
So, with the startup for me, that was my first job, and I'm just so thankful for having that. It taught me such qualities to dig in and do whatever it takes to be really persistent, and I'm carrying those over into my current job, and that stuff about the impact of talking to the CEO, or I would go to the embedded engineering lead. I'm this API is garbage. We gotta fix this. And then they would fix it. I'm yes, I helped. and that for sure, that like building a product up from the ground, that's really exciting. And then I don't know, Google is like not your typical large company, I think, and it kind of feels like a startup still, but without the resource constraints. And what I like there is that I'm like really digging into my products and mastering them without all of the other stuff. So back when I was at the startup, I loved having my hands in everything. And right now I'm loving the opportunity to like really dig in and master my two products.
So this can happen at a big company too. I was documenting a graphics processor chip that National Semiconductor was developing, and basically I went to the development team and I said, the way you've laid out this instruction architecture is inefficient, and if you just change this, or you could have general purpose registers instead of just special purpose registers and so forth. And so they changed it. And so I mean, you can do the same thing in a big company, but you really have to have the relationships with the people who are in a position to do the things that you want to see implemented.
So I have a question about distribution. So I've worked at some startups where, we think our product is so secret and so special that we can't let anybody see the docs. So, nothing on the web, nothing, and, to me the least secure thing is a PDF where they can just send the whole thing to somebody. But, how do you make the case for making some of the documentation public? Do you start with all of it or a subset? What areas are best to start with, and so on? We have like a web portal, but it's behind a login. So it's really hard for some of our end users to get to it. The name support people can get in, but how do you get that to people? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a tricky thing at a lot of startups. I'm all for having the docs public. A lot of times the founders are sensitive about that. My last company, it was 2 years in, they finally did, I won the battle to make the docs public. Where I'm at now, it is behind a login. So I think just keep asking. At a certain point of the company's maturity, they might feel like they're ahead enough with their IP that they don't have to be so secretive. I actually think it leads to more sales to have the docs public, because people can self-educate and they can see if the solution meets their needs, especially if your docs are good. You want them out there. It's going to bring in more customers. But again, it's like,
Yeah, that thing about sales is your ally. Our sales team, I was like, he went to me, or the head of sales, and he's like, we're getting so many leads from this, so like hook it up to analytics if you can, and be like, look at all this traffic that's coming to it. And then the sales guy is going to have a lot of pull in the company. If you can get stories of users getting confused, then you can go to the CEO and be like, is this what you want? Like, no. And then I kind of push them and I'm like, yeah, if the IP is really that sensitive, but a lot of times it's not. And I just like made the case that let's work more on the products, well, that's an aside. And then I think the last one, yeah, just keep pushing them. Like a lot of the time, it's so not necessary to have it behind the portal, the login.
So this is just sort of an edge case. There are a couple times I've worked for people who are doing certain kinds of security. Excuse me, and so it'd be irresponsible to actually get too much information about certain things out. So it's just, that's an edge case. I don't think it happens very often, but occasionally you do find that kind of thing.
Well, this is one of my hot buttons. What I tell people who want to keep their docs secret is that your competition already has your docs. You're only keeping it secret from your customers. It's stupid if your salespeople are out there, they're putting those docs in the hands of somebody who's giving it to your competitors because they're in there too. So really, it just makes it harder on you to trying to keep things secret, trying to put passwords on things, trying to encrypt them, whatever it is. That's all a lot of work, and I don't see any benefit from it.
So those of you who've been a solo writer at a small company, have you been tasked with building out a doc team, and either as a manager or as a as another member of the team, and what lessons have you learned from that?
Well, I haven't built out a whole team, but I've helped hire a couple of writers, and it was a fun experience, and I got to mentor a couple of younger writers, so I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, if a company's doing well, you get to hire people. So yeah, I always look forward to that moment when the company's growing enough that it is time to build out a team, and I have done it at a couple different places. Usually it comes when your customers start ramping, because the more customers you have, the more they need information, and the faster releases go, and they start growing engineering, and it's just natural that docs and QA and all the other functions grow along with that. So yeah, that's a happy time.
Didn't build one at Rand, but I've talked to a couple of people because I'm curious about this myself. And a big one was like selling the value of a writer as this person that has this unbelievable cross-sectional understanding of the company, and that's a really big asset. And then taking the writer on as like this fresh pair of eyes that's gonna pour over and I'm losing my train of thought.
I forgot the question.
It was about building a doc team, and have you had a situation where you're the sole writer and you've been asked to build a doc team? How do you go about that?
No, I haven't had that situation, although I've had to mentor a lot of new writers, or at one point I mentored 4 Indian writers who took over my job.
One more question here, and then I'm going to wrap it up with a couple questions.
So thinking about a scenario where you first enter a new company or you first encounter the product and you need to grasp an understanding of it, what do you find to be the most useful source of truth for what that application or product does? So where do you look for being the most accurate, the most up-to-date, the most comprehensive, be it UX, an original specification, a test script? Where's the source of truth?
The product itself. Yeah.
As expressed by what? The code?
I usually install the product like the first or second day that I get there and play with it. I know the goal of the user. I know like what I'm trying to achieve, be it like an analytics report, getting my data in. I do have a little data background, so I feel like I feel the pain of the users. So I think you have to experience the product firsthand and see if you can meet the goal that you're trying to achieve with it. And if you can't, that's where you start kind of polishing those edges. I think that a lot of times when you come into a startup, there's so much that needs to be done, especially if, like in the situation I'm now, that they have customers already. Where do you get started? You start with what's hard, and try to do like little things that are quick that you can get out to buy you time to build the big thing. So you know, a huge installation guide that covers every little thing is going to take a while, but I can make a quick checklist of like what are all the prerequisites that you need, and here's like the 5 high-level steps in a day, and then it buys me time. So it's kind of a trade-off. I think the source of truth is the product and the goal of the user, and making sure that you are getting information out that helps the user achieve the goal.
The goal of the user, for sure, 100%. There was like Internet of Things devices, so like build a little thermostat, connect it, control the stuff. And for me, I would just build these little applications, and that was the funnest part of the job, just tinkering around and figuring them out. And there's so many times when I would build it and use the API and like go back to the spec was completely wrong, like in terms of signature, of like API signature of the thing, and also just like functionally how it worked, how it behaved. My experience was engineers are implementing the whole system, and they might not actually be like taking the time to be their own end user and try out the product. Source code is also helpful to dig in and be like, this is what it actually does, but 100%. Go step into your customer's shoes and try to create that goal.
So I agree with everything that they've said. Just like in some places I've done a daily build. I come in the morning, build a product, you know, see a couple of bugs, file the bugs for the engineers, so I've got more friends, and you know, really work with the product. But I just wanted to tell a little story that is kind of fun in the telling. Is that at one startup they wanted me to write a whole, you know, big document, and it kind of needed to be done so that it could be checked off the checklist. But I understood that the actual customer already knew the product really well, and what they wanted was a cheat sheet that was just one page printed out on 2 sides. And so I quickly got that cheat sheet out for them. I understood exactly what they wanted, and they were elated. So, you know, I got like a little gold star from the customer, and then I went and I completed the other thing that everybody wanted me to do, which was, you know, a much bigger document. But, you know, please the customer first, understand their needs.
Well, I don't really want to address that exactly, but it just brings to mind the question of sample code, which is always a problem. And the reason it's a problem usually is that the developers, the engineers, often have no idea how the product's going to be used or is used, and so they're not a good source of sample code, and you're probably not a good source of sample code either. And so where do you get it? And often the answer is you have to find a customer who is willing to share some sample code.
So I have 2 follow-up questions to wrap things up with. One is about surviving an IPO, surviving an acquisition when you're in a startup situation. So if any of you have experience with that, we'll talk about that. And then the last question is about, so you want to be hired by a startup, and how do you go about thinking about how to negotiate your package with them? What are some of the things, some advice you could give on that? So the first question is about surviving an IPO or an acquisition. So I know, Daria, you have some experience with that. Could you help us talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so most of the exits of my startup have been acquisition. So I think when there's a lot of confusion when an acquisition happens, everyone's like, how are we going to get the next thing going, and you do it this way and we do it this way. I think it's important just to reach out to your counterpart on the acquiring company side and introduce yourself and start the conversation. I'm looking at you because I know that you're going through this right now. Start the conversation. Sometimes it's forced that you get along because, you know, the company that acquired you wants to put something out right away. I had a situation where 6 weeks after we were acquired, we were going to put out an appliance with the acquired software and hardware, and so we had to work together and figure it out. I think also your role is you have all the information about the product. You know a lot, and sharing that information with the field teams and offering little tutoring sessions or training to make everyone feel comfortable. And then you're seen as valuable too because you're helping. That's my advice.
Anyone else? Okay. So, Richard?
Well, I think the question was about negotiating a package, and I think the important thing there is, well, there are two important things. Well, one is to understand the value of each aspect of what they want to offer you. Sometimes it's hard to put a value on founder's stock. I mean, it could be worthless, it could be billions, you know, you don't always know. But you want certainly not to put all your eggs in one basket. So you don't want to be in the position that if this company goes out of business, you have nothing. So often in companies, you get stock options and you get maybe employee stock purchase plans and things like that. It's not wise to hold on to all of that stuff, usually. Usually it's best to be diversified in your investments, and that means just don't put all your eggs in one basket. Now, as far as evaluating what they offer you, I don't have good advice for that.
So a lot of people think when you go to a startup you have to take less salary because they're giving you equity. That's not true. The startups pay market value for the jobs, and you should expect that. So if they're saying, oh, well, you know, we're going to give you this because you're getting all this equity, I wouldn't accept that. So I would say, like, know what your market value is worth. I'm lucky because I'm married to a compensation consultant, so every time I'm looking at a job, he runs the numbers for me, so I know exactly what I'm worth. So I'd say know your market value and don't take that argument that, oh, we're giving you equity. And as far as equity is concerned, I would say that, you know, you are as valuable as an engineer in the company, and you should, especially at this stage, it's an important role, so you should be compensated along those lines. So the companies that I have started with, usually I get less than 1% share of the company. It's anywhere from 0.5% to 1/4%. Sounds really small, but for the stage that I come in, that's kind of the average of what an engineer, you know, gets and what a technical writer gets. That's just been my experience. So it's less about the number of shares and about the percentage ownership of the company.
Yeah, I mean, all I just have to say is there's an incredible demand for technical writers, so that us being on par with engineers is like, hold your ground with that one, for sure.
Can you ask them individually afterwards? Okay. So, because we have a little timeline here. So I want to thank the panel for coming. I really appreciate you all.